Welcome to the Profit-Led Podcast, where we discover proven growth strategies for bootstrapped entrepreneurs from the people who have done it before to help you accelerate your business. The Profit-Led Podcast is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform, which could save you from doing the same webinar over and over again. From sales demos to onboarding to training, eWebinar turns any video into an interactive webinar that you can set on a recurring schedule or make available on demand, which means you can do hundreds of webinars without ever needing to actually be there to host them live. This podcast is a forum for the unsung heroes of SaaS, the founders and others behind bootstrapped startups who are creative and resourceful enough to forge a pathway to success. Here is where they get to share everything they learned along the way, so you can benefit from their experience and find success in your own ventures too.
Welcome to today's episode of Profit-Led Season 2. Can't believe we're on episode 8 already, Todd.
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah, by the way, if you're listening and there are any topics you want us to get into this season, please let me know by connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear any ideas and feedback you have on this podcast. My name is Melissa Kwan, last name spelled Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. This season, we promise to give you a little window into our journey to $1 million and what it's like to build a company with very little resources. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard so far. I'm joined here now by my co-host, Todd Parmley, eWebinar's COO. Hey, Todd, how's it going?
I'm good. We're outside the city in Germantown, New York. It's very, very pretty up here. It's nice to get away from the city for a minute.
When I lived in New York, I was like, I don't even know where that is. Like when I lived in New York, I was like that. Remember there was one episode in Sex and the City with Miranda where she was dating this guy that never left Manhattan. When I lived in New York, I was that guy.
Well, I mean, I remember when I moved to New York and people were like, "Ugh, I'm getting out of the city." I was like, "What are you talking about? Why would you ever want to do that?" Now I'm like, "Get me out of here."
Yeah. In the last episode, we talked about our business model, how we came up with that, how we arrived at our initial subscription price. We talked about why I was so adamant about charging from day one and why I felt so strongly about free trials over freemium. In a later episode, we're actually going to go and talk about the 5 pricing decisions we made early on that turned out to be costly mistakes. So stay tuned for the rest of the season for that one. We are going to revisit some of the things that we talked about and how they came back to bite us. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the fun stuff, launching our MVP, the first time you unveil your baby to the world. I guess anyone who's done this before would probably say that it's more nerve-wracking than fun. So, Todd, have you ever been part of a startup launch before eWebinar?
I mean, not in this way, honestly, where it's from day one. I mean, I've definitely been a part of lots of product launches, right? But at existing companies, some of which were truly disastrous.
Yeah.
I mean, just like scarring. I think the closest experience before that, I worked at a startup in New York called Property Shark. It was my very first job after getting there. And it took off like crazy. It was the first startup in New York that had ever aggregated property data to one spot. And I didn't know anything about real estate. I knew very little about software technology. And all I did was gather feedback from unhappy customers and then we'd implement it.
Well, 14 years ago, I started many projects thinking every project was going to be easy. I was quite naive. And it was through that process that I realized launches can happen many times. It was like one of those things where I launched a product. I think my first ever idea was this events listing marketplace, kind of like a Craigslist for events, but in Vancouver where I was living. I just realized that product launches were so uneventful. And I realized at that point how hard it was going to be because you open the store and then nobody comes. And I was like, oh, did I just spend 6 months on this? In episode 6, we talked about taking an idea from product to launch, but never got into the actual launching of the product. So just as a reminder on that episode, we both shared what our idea of an MVP was. Your idea was to have a minimal marketable product that would allow us to compete in the automated category for webinars. And my idea was to have a minimal sellable product so I could go out and start closing deals from day one. And that process of idea to launch took 16 months. So that's 16 months before the first person ever saw our product. We didn't show any potential customers, nothing. It was just us building the silo. And I remember David, our CTO co-founder, was so frustrated from feeling like he was just coding forever because I refused to launch the product that we finally had to set a date and said, okay, this is the day we're rolling out. Otherwise, we're never going to do it. And the reason why I refused to launch it was because I knew what companies would pay for from spending 10 years in selling B2B. And I didn't want to put a product out there that they weren't going to pay for from day one. So I wanted to make sure that all the bells and whistles were there before anybody saw it, because I was just going to hit the phones and hit emails when we actually opened the door to our product. Do you remember what we had to do to get to that point, and what were you feeling at that time?
Well, I mean, we talked about this a little bit on an earlier episode, right? Like, first of all, we weren't, just to remind people, we weren't building something out of thin air. There were products that existed in this category. So we understood like some of the basic features that we needed to have. We had ideas for design that were workable that we could make better. And we also had primarily our chat feature, which was something that was really, truly innovative in this space, right? We knew what we were building to the degree that's possible when you don't have anybody looking at it yet. But as the day got closer to launch, I mean, David was losing his mind.
Just from me though, right? Or like not letting him put it out there.
I mean, it's hard, right?
Okay, but the reason for that though is because everybody says put it out there and get feedback. Everybody says that. And he's a developer and he thinks that. But I'm the salesperson that has to bring money in. You don't get a second chance, especially when you're selling to businesses. It's not like you're selling to consumers where you constantly have a new treasure trove of consumers to sell to. Like, this is the set of business users that I have relationships with that I was going to call. So I knew that I wasn't going to squander those initial sales calls. But in his mind, he thought I was just being really stubborn and not doing what I was supposed to do as a startup.
Right, right. And I mean, from my point of view, I remember just that we just got more and more brutal in terms of what we started cutting. We don't need this. We don't need this. Here's going to be the fast follows. We were really getting very, very brutal in our prioritization to get to this finish line. And then I remember the last big thing we cut was the Stripe integration, because we integrated it to the point where you could collect credit card information, but you couldn't actually charge it. So like we could get people's credit card information, but we couldn't do anything in it yet because no subscription payment process or whatever had been built. And we had an unusual subscription model, right? Pay per active webinar. So we had to figure that out. So we knew we wanted to have a free trial at this point. So we just extended the free trial to 60 days.
So we could buy us 60 days.
Yeah. So we could get 60 days to finish so we could collect credit card information when people first signed up, and we would be racing against the clock for 60 days to get the payment in place so that when day 60 arrived, we could charge them. And that was the final concession that we made so that we could get it out there live.
I think we set the day for like July 1st or something, which was almost a holiday weekend, but not really. So it was going to be kind of quiet. It was also a holiday in Canada, at least in North America. So the reason why we set it for that was so maybe there wouldn't be a ton of activity. And there was still activity because I was still working for the company that was acquired while I was building eWebinar on the side. My CEO knew that. I had him sign off. But the first day at launch, we were going to deliver a training on eWebinar for Spacio customers, which was my previous company. Do you remember what you were like feeling? Like, we had now worked on this for almost a year and a half.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was really nervous, right? I was excited, but I was probably more nervous. It's funny. I was trying to remember that first day when we launched to Spacio and had our very first like webinar with real attendees where things could actually go wrong. And, you know, it's kind of a blur. And I know that it's kind of a blur because I remember how I felt when that actually happened, but I'll let you tell the story first. I was probably more nervous than excited. I could envision in my head how the product would work, but that's very different than actually experience a product working. And we knew we were going to see things that we hadn't anticipated, right? We knew that. So it's just a matter of like, what was that going to be?
Yeah. I mean, I was excited that it was getting out the door, but I think a lot of founders can relate to this too, is you start to get scared because everything is amazing when it's not real. The dream is the best, right? I think that's why a lot of companies raise money before a product. Like, it's easiest and hardest, right? Like, if you can pitch it, then everything's a dream. Everything's going to go really well. But this is the moment of truth, right? Like, I have convinced you, David, the team, whoever was working on it, that this was going to be a thing, that people were going to love it. and, we're on the right track. And we spent a year and a half, almost a year and a half, a lot of money, getting to this point. And when something becomes real, you're either validating that belief, kind of an unjustified belief, or it's not going to work, right? Or you've invalidated this. But at that moment, all eyes are on you, the founder who came up with the idea and said, people are going to love this. So even though other similar products existed, like something like ours was still quite different. And we personally, as a team, this team had never run an evergreen webinar before. Like, you have never seen one in action. So the first customer of eWebinar was myself at Spacio. I was still with that startup. It was an open house check-in product. I was still working for my acquirer, who was HomeSpotter at the time. And we were launching a big feature, right? And I used eWebinar to deliver the webinar for announcing that feature and training it.
So HomeSpotter was announcing a big feature, and this was the announcement of it using eWebinar, right?
So Spacio became a product within the HomeSpotter suite. So I was still managing the sales for Spacio and all the training and all that stuff. So it was my training. I would have done it anyway. And the audience were like real estate agents. So I think we had like a couple hundred real estate agents that were signed up to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. It was 100.
And the thing is, up to this point, like nobody in the company had ever signed up for a non-live webinar. We had only used Zoom right at the time. And we weren't doing a lot of them. So we were actually testing our own registration page. Like, we were testing our emails, and everything was good up to that point. And, it was early 2020. People know what happened early 2020. We don't talk about it anymore. But we were, quote unquote, stuck in Hawaii. And I remember having breakfast in Hawaii, making eggs, and the webinar was starting. And so it was like all eyes on this screen while we were eating breakfast. And it was super cool for the first time watching people come into the chat, watching the webinar, asking questions about the product, the text messages coming through, and us able to respond. Like, all of this is first, right? And people asking, like, what platform are you using? Like, what software is this? Because for the first time, they're seeing a different kind of webinar, right? There's like polls that pop up, questions, things they can click on. It's so different. It's branded, right? It's so different than the regular Zoom that they were seeing. So at that point, it was like a huge load off my shoulders because it worked. But then at the same time, right after that was, oh, actually, now we have to go sell it.
Right, right. I mean, I remember, just to give my perspective on that story, I wasn't answering chat. I was just an observer watching you handle it. And I remember you texted me and you were like, I am eating breakfast and I am also running a webinar and I'm answering chat questions casually. That was the coolest surprise of that experience, is to see the chat in action and see how manageable it was. It was so easy to stay on top of. And chat in a live webinar situation is horrible. Either you have to like do Q&A at the end, or bring in like two other people in a like a webinar of 200 people. You have to have separate moderators moderating chat. And this was so easy. It was actually like relaxing. We were laughing. That's not typical of a launch. There's often tears.
I think at that moment, it became clear to David why I had pushed for features to be polished before they came out. Like, I think at that point, he was like, okay, I get it now. Things have to work. Like, real people using this product, like using Spacio, was getting trained on this. So we don't have a margin of error, right? Like, some things can break, like maybe some follow-up emails don't have to go out, but the core functionality of it has to work. Otherwise, I'm in trouble because I'm the one that brought this in and I'm the one who built it, right? But it was definitely very cool after months and months of working on it. And in the initial months, not knowing if it was ever going to see the light of day, because we had a lot of issues getting the first product up and running before David came in. So there were lots of hurdles, I guess, to get to that point. But seeing it was definitely really cool. But then you realize very quickly that a product launch is not the end. The product launch is actually when the real work begins. So that was when like the weight came back on my shoulder.
Right. That brief moment of like celebration. And just to add to what you said, we're a B2B product, right? So we're selling to businesses that are using us for a specific purpose in their business to like make money. And in some ways, we're like B2B to B because they're typically using our product to present to their customers. So if something goes wrong with our product, it reflects badly on them with their customers, which then gets reflected back to us. So it just increases the stakes. If it were a B2C product where the stakes were much, much lower, but we couldn't afford.
It's not like a product management where it's like a Monday where, oh yeah, like this item didn't log, right? Like if it didn't work, it was their customer.
Yes, exactly. It's like immediately reflecting back. And you know how that is. It's like they're never going to blame your software solution that you're using. They're just going to blame you if something goes wrong with the product that they're using. So those are relatively high stakes and why we had to have something that actually worked from head to toe when we first launched.
And then I guess as a founder, like you're now looking at a product that works, you have to sell it. And you're also, hopefully, at least in my case, I pay a very close eye to our financials. I always at any given time have 2 years of projections in Excel. I always have it. Every single month, I update it with real numbers from the past month. It's one of the most valuable things I learned as a founder is always know your financials and how much money is in the bank and how much you can spend in the future and what you have to make per subscription in order to break even. So all of that then became a reality.
Which is a side note, when you're VC backed, especially if they've given you a lot of money, that whole idea becomes abstract. But when you're bootstrapped, it's like, no, that's how much money we have. That's it. When that's gone, that's gone. So just to switch gears a little bit, we launched the product. You're like, oh, great. And then you're like, oh, shit, I have to sell this now. Like I have to try to get people to sign up. So by this time, I had started working more full time at a separate gig. So I wasn't as involved. But can you talk about the plan to get our first batch of customers on board, how that worked? Just talk through that process.
Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah. So after we set the date of July 1st, a month before that, I was already lightly reaching out to my network, letting them know I was doing something else. I'd been working on something, like kind of seeding the idea that I was on to something else. I just went through my phone, my old emails, like everything. I made a list of every single person that I knew or company that I knew that I've talked to in the past that could use this product. And because I was so close to the problem, like anyone that has a tech company, any real estate brokerage, right? These were my customers that I was working with. MLS platform, right? A lot of these companies continuously train real estate agents, or if they're a tech product, they're constantly doing demos or constantly training. So I built this product because I knew these companies had that problem, but I made a list of all of them. First, like my first degree network and my second degree network. And then it was very simple. It was just like name, company, email, if I had their phone number. And I would either email or text them to say, hey, by the way, I'm working on something new. Can I like set up a call and tell you? And because 2 years before that, I had an acquisition, like I was acquired, people were kind of curious because I was pretty quiet while I was working for HomeSpotter. So they were pretty curious about what I was doing next. So getting them on a call was very easy. A lot of my old customers, I was on a texting basis with. So a lot of these were favors. But, by that point, we had a website, like a coming soon website. The value props were all there. The website looked really good because we invested a lot of time and energy into the branding and design of it to make it look like it was kind of MailChimpy, but we didn't have any customers on it. And then I just got on a call with every single person and said, we're launching this product on this day. Would you want to see it in action? So then I would book a call after July 1st, because at that point, the product was operational. I would then do live demos. So it was kind of counterintuitive to what we're building and kind of ironic. But for 8 weeks between July and like the beginning of September, I did 6 to 8 demos every weekday, because every person that got on a call, I wouldn't let it end there, right? I'm such like a secondhand car salesman. Like every person that got on a call, I would ask for referrals and other people that they thought could use this before I got off the phone. And I would also give them a forwardable email. So I would make it super easy for them to forward my email to someone else so that I could set up a call or they could contact me, right? So these are all kind of tips and tricks of just being in the sales world for so long. But I would really milk that contact and the next one and the next one until, that thread kind of ran out. And then each person, when they got on a call, it was either like, yes, I want to sign up and try it. And then we'd give them a 60-day trial. Or it was like, well, I have to ask my boss or I have to ask my partner. And then they would set up a call with another person. So it's a very typical sales-led sales cycle. But what I would do, and I take it one step further, is if they say, yes, I want to sign up, I didn't actually let them sign up on the spot, because nobody had seen our product at all up to that point. And what we didn't have was customer feedback. So are people going to get what we're building, right? Are they going to be able to find the sign up button? Did we build our sign up form properly? Are people going to know how to upload a video and create a webinar all by themselves? Because don't forget, this is not a sales-led product. This is a product-led product. We're not going to talk to everybody beyond this batch of people. So people have to be able to sign up on a trial, activate themselves, and then continue and leave their credit card in, all without us. So I knew that from the beginning. So what I did with this first batch of customers or signups was I would set up an onboarding call, and they knew this was an onboarding call. So I would say a day before the call, make sure you have a credit card ready. You cannot sign up without a credit card. And I get that I could say that because a lot of these are my old customers and my friends, but that's what 10 years of startups kind of earns you. But it's not to say that you can't do that, right? It's just setting expectations. It's like you can't sign up without a credit card. And so make sure you have your corporate credit card. So they would come, they would sign up, and I would tell them like, this is actually also a feedback session. So they know what's happening. I'm not like blindsiding them with yet another 1-hour call. Like they know they're a first customer. We're not lying to them about this is new. Everybody knows. So they're a bit more forgiving. So when they come on the call, I would watch them sign up. I would watch them fill out the form, confirm the email. And then I would either give them a video or they would have a video ready, either on YouTube or whatnot. And I would watch them go through the 5-step process of creating an eWebinar on their own. And I told them, I'm not going to say anything until you finish publishing the webinar. So it was like uploading the video, it was creating the schedule, writing the notifications, like adding at least one interaction, which is like a poll or a question, setting a chat moderator, and then creating a registration page and then publishing. So it was all those steps. And then we recorded all those calls, mostly because you had a full-time job and you couldn't be on those calls. It was really just David and I. And it was so interesting to watch people fumble and not know what they're doing. Because we didn't start from like, hey, here's a sign up form. They would come to our website first, and then they would click sign up and kind of go through that process. So I probably went through 80 of those before I stopped doing it, because then it was sucking up a lot of time, but I was also hearing the same thing over and over. So there's really only so much feedback that you could get. So every week we would take whatever feedback that we got, and then we would apply them. And then the next batch would see it. The next batch would see it. The next batch would see it. So we were continuing to improve things as we were getting feedback. I don't know if you remember some of like the most obvious things.
Oh, yeah. I was sort of peripherally involved, right? But I remember, how can you not see that? Like things that are so obvious to us and you don't know until somebody uses it. I mean, I just want to comment on one thing you said, which was, it was kind of counterintuitive that you were doing live demos with these customers when we're an automated demo product, effectively. But I think it's actually important because that's where, A, we were using it to gather customer feedback about the product itself, right? And how to make that better. But B, you were also learning how to sell the product, what resonated, what didn't, what questions people had. So when it came time to automate our demo, you were able to do it in a way that it could sell the product itself without it having to be live. So I think that is actually valuable to understand. You can't just automate a demo and you don't quite know what you're selling yet. You have to go through a process where you understand how to sell your product.
Yeah. A lot of people ask me like, how do I create a demo on my own? I'm like, are you ready to automate it? How many live demos have you done? Because unless you feel like a robot can't do your job. Unless you know you have a pitch that can close all the objections, like what people care about, you can't work that into your demo or in your presentation. So I was able to kind of gather enough data, and then every single pitch was exactly the same. But you're exactly right. Like talking to people and listening to how they were describing the problem, and
Right.
maybe listening to them tell me the different use cases that they were going to apply this to, help me talk to similar companies in that space.
Yeah. Right. That was also a part of the learning of these calls, was also just like how to sell it, how to refine our demo, how to understand all of those things. And then in terms of the product, I mean, I was peripherally involved, but I just remember being shocked that people did not know how to use certain things. But as a product manager too, like I wasn't shocked, but I'm shocked every time. Every time I show somebody, I think that is 100% clear design, and they're like, I have no idea how to use this. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, then that's what customer research is for.
But this is a really good reminder, right? Because we stare at something for a year and a half and we think it's super clear. We've got an all-star designer. We've got David, who spent 20 years in building products. We've got you as a product manager, all eyes on this product, trying to make it as easy as possible. And then you've got a person who's never seen the product, who doesn't even know that this category of product exists, coming in for the first time, right? And you're having like a baby explain back to you, this is what it does, right? And this is how I'm going to use it. And maybe I think a function of them not really knowing what to do was because we're on a call with them for half an hour and they maybe feel time pressure. So maybe there's a bit of that. Oh, you're looking at me and I have to do this really quickly. So I think there was a little bit of that, but it's good to remind yourself, like, it's not like you're launching a feature and your product already works. So if they don't discover your feature, it's okay, right? When you're launching, your entire product is your feature. And if they don't know how to use it, you don't get the credit card. You don't get the subscription. And you can't make money as soon as possible.
Right.
But it was also like really obvious things. I remember one of the things that blew my mind was, so we've got like 5 tabs, right? You know, the schedule, email notifications, like just so the listeners have context, like these are like the 5 steps you have to go through. And then the publish button, it was massive. They were like massive tabs on the top. And they were white with pink text. Everything else was not pink. It was white with pink text. And people would upload the video and they would not know what else to do. Like they did not see the buttons at all, even though they were the only buttons on the screen. So imagine having like a browser with 5 tabs open. That's what those tabs look like.
Yeah.
And some people, they're looking around, they're moving their mouse around and you're like, oh my God, how can you not look at the top? And then they would just press the publish button and be like, oh, I'm done. Like that was like the first button they saw. And then all we did was we flipped the colors to pink and then white text and making it more obvious. But they were still in the same place. They were just a different color. And then people started seeing it. So it was just super, super obvious things like that were really surprising. So a good reminder to always be learning and always be like challenging what you think you know and let the customers tell or show you what their experience is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we also added we made it a little bit more obviously wizard-like, right? So there was basically like, go to the next step, go to the next step. So it was a little bit more obvious, but I do remember that. That was a baffling moment. One other thing that might be unique to us, and you sort of touched on it earlier, is people were not familiar with this category, right? This category of a pre-recorded webinar. And I remember myself, when you first explained it to me, I was like, huh? Wait, what? I didn't get what you were saying until I got it. There's a mental leap our customers have to take before they're like, oh, I get this. And so we saw that again. And since we'd already taken the leap, we had to sort of remind ourselves that, oh, right, this is something else that people have to really grasp what our product is and how it works before they can really understand its value. And the thing that's exciting, though, is when they have the aha moment, it's really obvious. They're like, oh, wow, I can scale my webinars in a way that I didn't even know was possible.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that people that signed up earliest, like this first batch, would actually use the product so we could actually convert them. So I remember for the 60 days that they were on trial, I would check their account like once a week. And I mean, I can't do that now, right? We didn't have any onboarding software. We didn't think about activation. Didn't even learn about activation until a year ago. Didn't even know that word. We just had a product. And I legitimately thought that if we were solving a problem, that people were going to love it and everyone was going to sign up. Like I was so close to the problem that it didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't, that people wouldn't just want to sign up for it and want to solve that problem, right? The problem that we were solving is like, remove the repetitive webinars off your plate. Like who wants to do them? Because I personally didn't want to do them. So I would log into these customers' account once a week to see if they were using it. And then if they weren't using it, I would email them or text them and be like, hey, why aren't you using it? Is there anything I can do to get you to use it? Who do I need to speak to? Who is the person that owns this part of your business? So I also did that for 60 days.
Right. So one of the astonishing numbers that came out of that trial was 85% of our trial users converted into paying customers at the end of that 60-day trial. Do you want to talk about that moment? I mean, I remember it.
Yeah, I think we had just under 100 signups, maybe like, I want to say like 70 or 80 people. And that number is not indicative of what happened later on because, you know, these are first, second degree removed people, like friends, right? These are like friendlies. And I was doing that thing, right? Where I was checking up with them once a week, helping them, asking if I could upload their video. There were some experiences we created for them, right? We just wanted them to see the webinar in action. We're like, we'll create the whole thing for you. Just roll it out once, right? We just want you to see it in action because we knew that that feeling would be so strong, right? That is really kind of the time to value is like, how quickly can we get you to watch people attending your webinar while you're in your pajamas? Just like I was in Hawaii. But I remember as it got closer and closer to September 1st, I'm like, are people going to pay? And we've increased our prices since then. But back then, like we started with $49.99 and $199, right? So a lot of people were either at the level 1 or 2. So they either had 1 or 2 webinars. It was either going to be $49 or $99. And because these were my friendlies, I wanted to make sure they knew that it was going to be charged on September 1st. So I even took that one step further. I didn't want there to be any awkwardness. If they were like, why'd you charge my credit card or refund me? Like, you know, no one's really going to do that because they're my friends. And so I reached out to every single one of the accounts and I said, hey, by the way, and we do have trial and emails, but I reached out to them and I said, do you know that eWebinar is coming to an end? How do you feel about the product? Or I see that you haven't used it. Now is the time to cancel if you want, but of course you can leave it active if you want to. And I checked in with every single account and made sure they knew that keeping the credit card inside was what they wanted to do. And some people were like, oh, I actually haven't had time yet, but I think paying for it will force me to get started. We had people that didn't start until like month 10 or 11. And I kept checking up with them because these are my friends. I'm like, do you want to cancel? And they're like, no, it's fine. So that was also kind of a mind-blowing thing because I'm like, is this like a gym? Like, you know, everybody signs up for the gym on like January 1st and then they make a bunch of the revenue off people that don't go. It kind of felt like that, but don't forget, I've never had a real like low ARPU, like low average revenue per user product before. Like I only had enterprise products where it's 10K to 100K per year and people used it. Or like they would force some department to use it. So it was the first time I saw how a low subscription SaaS could potentially run. I mean, not that it's a good thing, but in the beginning, you kind of just, you have to get what you can get because you need the revenue. So September 1st, we did convert 85% of the customers that were already in the platform. And I think we made $3,000 or something. But then it felt like it was like off to the races at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I remember too, not everybody started their 60 days at the same time. So there was this cascading thing where people would convert. Because remember, we were doing it iteratively, right? Like that you explained, we'd show it to some people, onboard some people, and then we'd fix some things and onboard some more people. So it was like little waves of conversions after that. And it was like a party every time. You know, it's like, even if it was only like 2-3 people that converted that day, it was like, oh my God, we have new customers. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, but I think what I didn't know and what I were to learn, I guess, shortly after that is how hard it was going to be. So I think we had a very nice 60 days with people that we knew, people that were more forgiving. We were still learning. We were excited, right? Like enthusiasm was high, energy was high, but I really could not have been prepared, I think, for the tough work that would come after that. But I do think this is a good place to stop because the next episode is getting into that, right? So the next episode is actually product launch. Now, what do we do?
Right. I'll summarize today what we talked about, right? So we talked about a few things. the period leading up to our launch date and what that launch was like, seeing the product in action for the very first time when you used it to launch that new feature for Spaceo, and then how we got our first set of customers onto the platform from when they first onboarded to when they actually paid for the first time. So with all that in mind, do you have a hot take for today's episode?
Yeah, I mean, as a profit-driven founder, I would say set expectations with early customers that they have to pay, even if they're first, right? I think there's this misconception that you have to give more leeway to people that are first, or you have to give a huge discount to people that are first, whatever that might be. But people don't value things they don't pay for, period. If they don't pay for it, they're not going to use it, right? That's why the average conversion for freemium is like 1 or 2%. Like, it's super low. And if they don't pay for it, they're not going to activate. If they don't activate, they don't see the value, and then you don't get the money, right? So it's just kind of a vicious cycle. And also, if you don't value yourself, nobody else will. So we never said we were going to give discounts. We said we were going to give a 60-day trial. And everybody knew that credit card that they put in, it was not just to activate their trial. It was going to be charged on September 1st. And I reminded them throughout the trial, and I got in touch with them probably like 5 days before it was actually going to be charged. So everybody had that expectation that this is a service that we were going to charge for. So I think a lot of founders are afraid to do that because maybe they feel like the first product isn't good enough. But all you need to do is have conviction that you are solving one really important thing for them. And that important thing is worth $50 or, whatever you're asking for. I mean, set the price kind of accordingly, but that is my hot take, is like, just let people know you're going to charge from day one. Because if you're bootstrapped, you don't have that much runway. You're probably surviving off your savings or friends and family funding, whatever that might be. And the quicker you get to profitability, the sooner that financial stress goes away. What is your hot take?
I think mine is just, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. There were so many things that you plan, you think and you just have to learn as you go. I mean, that may sound really, really obvious, but like I said, it's shocking every time when you realize what a huge blind spot you had. But that's good information, right? That's good information, and realize that it's coming. Yes, you can be shocked, but just adjust. We had to scramble for some things after that launch, but it was fine. It was fine.
Yeah. Well, if there are particular topics you want us to get into this season, please let me know by connecting with me on LinkedIn. Or if you have any feedback about this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. My name is Melissa Kwan. Last name spelled Kwan. And if what we've talked about today resonates with you, subscribe to ProfitLed on your favorite podcast app to get notified of new episodes, and join our mailing list by going to profitled.fm. I promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks for listening to this episode. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to ProfitLed. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the ProfitLed podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.